How far will a person go to leave behind a legendary reputation? What happens when ruthless thieves unknowingly target someone who was once the most feared duelist in the Arizona Territory? The Mackenzie gang thought they'd found an easy target in Thomas Cooper, a simple ranch hand at the Willow Creek Ranch. But they're about to learn that some men's quiet demeanor hides a deadly past. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The summer heat shimmered across Willow Creek Valley, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the drought-parched grasslands. Thomas Cooper wiped the sweat from his brow as he mended the fence line at the far edge of the Mitchell family's ranch, his weathered hands working with practiced efficiency. At 36, his lean frame carried the wiry strength of a man who'd spent years at hard physical labor, though few would guess the true source of the old scars that marked his hands. To the casual observer, Thomas was exactly what he appeared: a skilled but unremarkable ranch hand who'd worked the Willow Creek Ranch for the past 5 years. He was known for his quiet competence, his way with horses, and his tendency to avoid the rowdier gatherings in nearby Silver Springs when the hands went to town. Old Jack Mitchell, the ranch owner, appreciated Thomas's reliability and his skill with the livestock. Sarah Mitchell, Jack's daughter who managed the ranch books, valued his attention to detail and the careful records he kept of his work. But there were details about Thomas Cooper that even his employers had never noticed. The way he positioned himself when working, always maintaining clear sightlines across the property, how he kept his riding gear meticulously organized for quick deployment. The peculiar way he'd modified his work gloves, making them easy to shed in a single smooth motion. These weren't the habits of a simple ranch hand. They were the ingrained patterns of someone who'd spent years where split-second reactions meant the difference between life and death. The distant sound of approaching horses drew Thomas's attention. Through the heat haze, he counted 4 riders moving along the valley's eastern rim, their path taking them past several neighboring ranches. Their riding style caught his eye: the careful spacing between horses, the way they studied each property they passed. These weren't local hands or casual travelers. Their movements carried the predatory patience of men evaluating potential targets. 5 years ago, when Thomas Cooper was still known by another name, he would have already been moving to investigate these suspicious riders. Back then, he'd been Marcus Lightning Hawkins, the legendary duelist who'd faced down the notorious Clayton brothers in the streets of Tombstone. The man whose speed with a gun had become the stuff of whispered stories in saloons across 3 territories. But Thomas Cooper, ranch hand, simply continued his fence repair work, though his attention never left the distant riders. "Those the Mackenzie boys?" Old man Harris's voice carried across the fence line. The neighboring rancher had ridden up while Thomas studied the distant group. "Saw them asking questions in town yesterday. Word is they're looking to buy cattle, but something about them didn't sit right." Thomas nodded, careful to maintain his role as a simple ranch hand. "Riding awful care for cattle buyers," he observed, his tone carrying just the right amount of casual concern. Harris spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Sheriff Reeves seems to think they're connected to those ranch robberies over in Yavapai County. 3 places hit in the past month. Thieves show up claiming to be buyers, cause the operation, then return with numbers once they know the layout." Thomas absorbed this information while keeping his hands busy with the fence work. The Mackenzie gang's reputation had reached him. Even here, 4 brothers who'd graduated from small-time robbery to coordinated ranch raids. Their pattern was methodical: identify isolated targets, study their defenses, then strike with overwhelming force. Local law enforcement seemed unable to stop them, though Thomas had his suspicions about why. "Might want to warn Miss Sarah," Harris continued. "Mackenzie's second youngest, James, was asking mighty specific questions about the Willow Creek Ranch's finances yesterday. Seemed real interested in hearing about how Jack Mitchell's recovery Is going. Thomas's hands stilled momentarily on the fence wire. Jack Mitchell had been badly injured 2 months ago when his horse spooked during a storm. The accident had left Sarah managing most of the ranch operations while her father recovered. The Mackenzies targeting the ranch now, when its owner was vulnerable, was no coincidence. A flash of movement caught his eye, someone watching from the tree line near the eastern pasture. The observer's position and patience suggested professional experience. Thomas recognized the technique from his own days tracking outlaws. The Mackenzies weren't just scouting the ranch casually, they had serious professionals assessing its defenses. Miss Sarah's capable, Thomas replied carefully, maintaining his simple ranch hand persona. Runs this place better than half the men in the territory. Harris nodded agreement. That she does. Still, it might be worth letting her know about our visitors, times being what they are. As Harris rode off, Thomas continued his work while his mind processed the situation with the tactical precision that had once made him the most feared duelist in Arizona. The Mackenzies would have learned about Jack Mitchell's injury and recognized the ranch's temporary vulnerability. They'd be evaluating Sarah's capabilities, looking for weaknesses to exploit. What they couldn't know was that their careful surveillance had already been noticed by someone whose observational skills far exceeded their own. 5 years ago, Marcus Lightning Hawkins had walked away from his reputation, tired of the constant challenges from young guns looking to make a name for themselves. He'd chosen the quiet life of Thomas Cooper, ranch hand, finding peace in honest work and the simple respect he earned through competence rather than fear. But he'd never stopped maintaining the skills that had made him a legend. Never fully. Left behind the instincts that had kept him alive through countless confrontations. The distant riders disappeared over the valley's rim, but Thomas knew they'd be back. The Mackenzies weren't the type to abandon a target once they'd selected it. They'd return with more men, confident in their ability to overwhelm what they saw as a vulnerable ranch managed by a woman and worked by simple hands. They had no way of knowing that their chosen target was protected by someone who'd once been the fastest gun in 3 territories. The sun was setting as Thomas finished the fence repairs, its fading light painting the valley in shades of gold and shadow. To the east, storm clouds were gathering over the Dragoon Mountains, promising rain that the drought-parched land desperately needed. As he gathered his tools, Thomas caught another flash of movement in the tree line. A different observer, more carefully hidden than the first. The Mackenzies were thorough in their preparation, professional in their planning. It would make their eventual discovery of his true capabilities that much more dramatic. Sarah Mitchell was waiting by the barn when Thomas rode in, her expression carrying the quiet strength that had earned her the respect of every hand on the ranch. At 28, she managed the Willow Creek's operations with the combination of practical experience and sharp business sense that had helped the ranch prosper even in difficult times. "Thomas," she called out as he dismounted, "a moment of your time?" He followed her into the barn, noting how she positioned herself to keep the entrance in view, another detail that suggested Sarah Mitchell was more observant than most gave her credit for. "Harris mentioned we had visitors today," she said without preamble. "Riders watching the property." "Mackenzie gang," Thomas confirmed, careful to maintain his ranch hand demeanor. "4 of them, moving like professionals. They're evaluating the ranch, likely planning something while your father's recovering." Sarah's expression tightened slightly. "James Mackenzie was in town yesterday, asking questions about our financial situation. Tried to make it seem casual, but he was fishing for specific information about our operations, our hands, our defenses." Thomas nodded, impressed again by her attention to detail. "They're building a picture of the ranch's vulnerabilities. Standard procedure before they strike. They see a woman managing alone, figure we're an easy target." "We're not alone," Sarah replied, studying him with an intensity that suggested she'd noticed more about him than he'd realized. "Father's recovery is progressing well, and we have good hands. Loyal people." The way she emphasized that last point made Thomas wonder just how much Sarah Mitchell had deduced about his past. She'd always been more observant than most, noticing details others missed. Had she seen through his careful maintenance of the simple ranch hand persona? Before he could ponder this further, a rider appeared in the barn entrance. Young Billy Turner, one of the hands they'd sent to town for supplies. The boy's face carried the urgent expression of someone with important news. "Miss Sarah," Billy called out, his voice carrying the excitement of youth. "Sheriff Reeves asked me to pass on a warning. Just got word from Prescott, the Mackenzie. Gang hit the Davidson place last night. Burned out the entire operation when old man Davidson refused to sell." Thomas absorbed this information with the tactical analysis that had once made him legendary. The Davidson ranch was less than 50 miles away. The Mackenzies striking there meant they were moving deliberately through the territory, targeting properties they'd previously scouted. Willow Creek would likely be next on their list. "Thank you, Billy," Sarah replied calmly, though Thomas noted the subtle tension in her posture. "Please let the other hands know we'll be implementing additional security measures, effective immediately." As Billy rode off to spread the word, Sarah turned back to Thomas. Her next words suggested she'd indeed noticed far more about him than he'd suspected. "I think it's time we discussed your real experience with situations like this, Mr. Cooper. Or should I say, Mr. Hawkins?" Thomas felt the familiar stillness settle over him, the calm focus that had once made him feared throughout the territories. He'd known this moment might come. Sarah Mitchell was too observant to miss all the signs. "Forever." "How long have you known?" "Since last spring," she replied, moving to close the barn doors. "When those drifters tried stealing our horses, I saw how you moved that night, saw the way you disarmed the leader. No regular ranch hand has those kinds of skills." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The incident she referenced had been carefully managed. Thomas had ensured no one got a clear look at his face, and had made the takedown appear more lucky than skilled. But Sarah had seen through the deception, found an old wanted poster in Prescott, she continued, not for arrest, for hire. U.S. Marshals seeking Marcus Lightning Hawkins to help track the Clayton brothers. The artist's sketch was younger, but the eyes were yours. Same way of watching everything without seeming to. Thomas studied her carefully. Sarah wasn't just smart, she was strategic. She'd known his identity for months, but had maintained his cover, understanding the value of a hidden asset. "Your father?" "Doesn't know," she confirmed. "Nor do the other hands. I figured you had your reasons for seeking anonymity. Your work's been exemplary and your past is your business. But with the Mackenzies moving in, with father still recovering," she let the implications hang in the air. The mention of Jack Mitchell's condition turned Thomas's thoughts to the timing of recent events. "The accident that injured your father, you've investigated it." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "You think it wasn't an accident? Mackenzies are thorough in their planning. They prefer targets that are already vulnerable, easier than creating vulnerabilities themselves, but they're not above arranging convenient accidents when needed." "The horse that spooked," Sarah said, slowly, "was one we'd bought just 2 weeks before, came highly recommended by a dealer in Prescott." Her expression hardened as the implications became clear. "Right around the time James Mackenzie was first seen in that area." Thomas nodded grimly. The Mackenzies' preparation was more thorough than he'd initially suspected. They hadn't just identified the Willow Creek Ranch as a target, they'd actively worked to weaken its leadership. A distant rumble of thunder drew their attention. The storm was moving in faster than expected, the gathering darkness making the barn's interior feel more conspiratorial. "Reputation says you retired undefeated," Sarah said quietly. "Walked away at the height of your legend. Why?" "Man can only live by his gun for so long," Thomas replied, choosing his words carefully. "Eventually, the weight of the reputation becomes its own kind of prison. Every young gun looking to make a name, every grieving relative seeking revenge, every drunk bold enough to think he's the one who'll finally take down Lightning Hawkins." Sarah absorbed this, her analytical mind clearly processing the implications. "And now, the Mackenzies won't just raid us, they'll try to destroy anyone who resists. Davidson's ranch won't be the last to burn." "Fire reveals things," Thomas said, softly. "Burns away pretense. Man can't maintain a false face when everything's burning around him." Their conversation was interrupted by rapid hoofbeats approaching the barn. Through the gaps in the wooden walls, they saw two riders approaching at speed, more of the ranch hands returning from town. The expressions on their faces suggested urgent news. "Miss Sarah," called out Pete Morgan, the more experienced of the two. "Just got word. Davidson wasn't just burned out. They shot him, made it look like he died in the fire, and his foreman," Pete's voice caught slightly. "They made an example of him. Real slow. Word is James Mackenzie did the work personally." Thomas felt the old instinct surge, the tactical assessment, the mental cataloguing of threats and responses. The Mackenzies weren't just launching a series of robberies. They were systematically destroying anyone who might resist their expansion into the territory. "There's more," Pete continued, his voice dropping. "Sheriff Reeves, after Davidson's place, burned. He suddenly started telling folks he reckoned it was probably just an accident, won't even investigate. And Judge Wilson's cancelled all his scheduled hearings for the next month, says he's visiting family back east." The pattern was clear. The Mackenzies had prepared thoroughly, ensuring local law enforcement and legal authorities would be compromised or absent when they made their move. They were creating a window where they could operate without interference, systematically destroying anyone who stood in their way. Sarah's expression remained composed, but Thomas noted the slight tremor in her hands, not from fear, but from carefully controlled anger. "Get everyone gathered in the main house," she instructed Pete. "We need to discuss our options." As the riders moved to comply, Sarah turned back to Thomas. "I've respected your privacy, your choice to leave your old life behind. But I have to ask, are you willing to be Marcus Hawkins again if it means protecting these people?" Thomas Cooper, the quiet ranch hand who'd found peace in honest work, looked out at the gathering storm. For 5 years, he'd avoided violence, turned away from the legend he'd once been. But the Mackenzies weren't going to offer that choice. They'd bring the violence regardless, destroy everything and everyone he'd come to care about. The stillness settled over him again, not the peaceful quiet of his ranch hand life, but the deadly calm that had once made him the most feared duelist. In the territories, Marcus Hawkins spent his life enforcing other people's laws, he said quietly. Perhaps it's time he enforced some justice instead. Thunder rolled across the valley as Sarah and Thomas walked toward the main house. The storm was about to break, but it wasn't the only thing. The Mackenzie gang thought they'd found another vulnerable target, another easy conquest in their campaign of terror. They were about to learn why Marcus Lightning Hawkins had never been defeated and why some legends are better left undisturbed. The night wind carried the scent of rain through Silver Springs as James Mackenzie sat at his private table in the Lucky Strike Saloon, methodically cleaning his customized Colt. At 32, the youngest of the Mackenzie brothers had earned a reputation for precision in both his appearance and his brutality. His tailored black vest and immaculate white shirt seemed at odds with the calluses on his trigger finger, the small scars that marked his hands. Through the saloon's grimy windows, lightning illuminated the deserted street. Most of the town's citizens had hurried home when they saw the Mackenzie brothers ride in, their fear a testament to how quickly the gang's reputation had spread. 4 empty glasses sat on James's table, one for each of the men who'd challenged him over the years. None had survived to finish their drinks. "Interesting report from our man in the sheriff's office," Michael Mackenzie, the eldest brother, said, as he joined James at the table. At 45, Michael carried himself with the cold authority of someone accustomed to absolute control. "Seems Willow Creek Ranch has an unusual hand. Fellow named Cooper, who has been there 5 years, keeps to himself." James continued his methodical weapons maintenance, though his eyes showed fresh interest. How unusual. Never go to town with the other hand, never joins in social events. But here's what caught my attention. No one can find any record of him before he showed up at Willow Creek. Men that are capable with horses and ranch work should have a history in the territory. The youngest Mackenzie brother absorbed this information with professional thoroughness. Their success wasn't just built on violence. It came from careful intelligence gathering, from understanding their targets completely before moving against them. Could be running from something, law, debts, angry husband, or he's something else entirely, Robert Mackenzie interjected, emerging from the shadows near the bar. The second eldest brother had always been their best tracker, able to read men's histories in their habits and movements. "Watched him work today. Man's got military precision in his movements, always aware of his surroundings, maintains clear sight lines. Those aren't ranch hand habits." James set his cleaned weapon aside, giving his brothers his full attention. "Law, man? Different kind of training," Robert replied thoughtfully. "Saw him handle a potential confrontation with some drifters last week. Didn't move like law enforcement, more like, well, like someone who's used to handling things personally." The implications hung in the air as William Mackenzie, the third brother, joined them. At 38, William handled the gang's financial operations, transforming their violent takeovers into legitimate-appearing business transactions. Either way, he's the only real variable at Willow Creek. Rest of the hands are known quantities, basic cowhands, nothing special. "And the Mitchell woman?" James asked, though he'd already formed his own assessment of Sarah Mitchell during his reconnaissance visits to the ranch. "Capable manager," William confirmed, "but she's stretched thin covering for her injured father. Bank's been pressuring them about loans, thanks to our friends at the territorial office. She'll be looking for a buyer soon enough, willing or not." Michael leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Speaking of pressure, Judge Wilson's received his payment. He'll be conveniently absent when we make our move. Sheriff Reeves is also properly motivated. A tragic accident at his brother's farm could happen any time if he gets too interested in ranch fires." James nodded in satisfaction. The Mackenzies hadn't become the most feared gang in the territory through random violence. They operated with precision, eliminating resistance through a combination of strategic pressure and calculated brutality. The Davidson Ranch had been a perfect example, one public display of their methods, and suddenly other ranchers became much more amenable to selling at discount prices. A flash of movement caught James's eye, one of their scouts entering the saloon. The man's urgent expression suggested significant news. "Report," Michael commanded quietly. "That Cooper fellow," the scout said, keeping his voice low. "Been asking around about him. Found an old-timer who swears he recognized something in the way the man carries himself. Says it reminds him of stories about Marcus Lightning Hawkins." The name sent a ripple of tension through the brothers. Even James, young as he was when Hawkins was active, knew the legends. The duelist who'd never been beaten, who'd taken down the Clayton brothers when even U.S. Marshals couldn't touch them. The man who'd disappeared 5 years ago, vanishing so completely that some thought him dead. Hawkins retired undefeated, William pointed out. Why would he be working as a simple ranch hand? Same reason some wounded predators hide in deep or caves, Robert replied thoughtfully, looking for quiet, for peace, until something forces them out. James studied his reflection in the saloon window, remembering the stories he'd heard about Hawkins in his younger days. The legendary speed, the deadly accuracy, the way he could read a man's intentions before they even cleared leather. If Cooper was really Hawkins, "Doesn't matter who he was," James declared, his hand resting on his cleaned Colt. "Man can't hide from his nature forever. Push him hard enough, he'll show his true face. And then we find out if the legend of Lightning Hawkins was just that, a legend." Michael's tone carried dark anticipation. "Could be an opportunity. Little brother, man like that, forced out of hiding, forced to show what he really is. That's the kind of reputation-making opportunity that doesn't come along often." The implications were clear. If Cooper was really Hawkins, taking him down would elevate the Mackenzie gang from successful outlaws to legendary status. The man who killed Lightning Hawkins would instantly become the most feared gunman in the territory. Through the window, James watched lightning split the sky again. The storm was gathering force, much like the forces they were preparing to unleash. On Willow Creek Ranch, "How do you want to play it?" he asked Michael. The eldest Mackenzie considered carefully. Their success came from adapting their methods to each target, from understanding not just vulnerabilities, but how best to exploit them. "If he is Hawkins, he'll be watching our usual pattern. We'll need something different, something that forces him to reveal himself." "The Mitchell woman," William suggested. "Our sources say she's the one who handles all the ranch's business dealings. We get to her. We control the property's fate." James felt the familiar anticipation building, the predatory focus that had made him the gang's most effective enforcer. "And if Cooper is really Hawkins, threatening her will force him to show his true nature. Can't maintain a cover when someone you're sworn to protect is in danger." "Extra motivation too," Robert added with a cold smile. "Word is, Sarah Mitchell's the one who gave him a chance, hired him without asking too many questions about his past. Man like Hawkins, who's seen the worst of human nature? That kind of loyalty means something." The brothers began refining their plan, each contributing their particular expertise. Michael's strategic thinking, William's financial manipulation, Robert's tracking skills, and James's talent for calculated violence. Together, they'd created an operation that had terrorized 3 territories. But if Cooper really was Hawkins, they were about to face something unprecedented. As the meeting continued, none of the brothers noticed the quiet piano player in the corner, the way his fingers never faltered despite his careful attention to their conversation. In an hour, he'd be riding through the storm, carrying word to his real employers about the Mackenzie gang's plans. The territorial governor's secret investigators had been building a case against the brothers for months, documenting their methods, their connections, and their entire criminal empire. The piano player's message would eventually reach a U.S. Marshal's office, where it would join a growing file of evidence. But it would also pass through other hands first, including those of a certain ranch hand at Willow Creek, who had very personal reasons for wanting to know the Mackenzie gang's intentions. The storm's intensity increased as James Mackenzie finally holstered his cleaned weapon. Tomorrow, they'd begin implementing their plan, setting in motion events that would either establish their legendary status or expose them to justice that had been building for years. Either way, Willow Creek Ranch was about to become the center of forces that had been gathering strength for longer than anyone suspected. Thunder shook the saloon's windows as Michael laid out the final elements of their strategy. "One more thing," he added, pulling out a folded document. "Our friend at the land office provided something interesting. Territorial survey maps showing underground water sources throughout the region. Willow Creek Ranch sits on top of the largest aquifer in the territory." William's eyes lit with understanding. "That's why you've been so interested in this particular property. It's not just about the ranch. Controlling that water source means controlling every farm and ranch for 50 miles. Precisely, Michael. Confirmed. Once we secure Willow Creek, we can dictate terms to the entire valley. Any property that doesn't cooperate simply loses access to water. In this drought, that's a death sentence for their livestock. James studied the survey maps with fresh interest. Their operation wasn't just about intimidation and violence. It was about securing fundamental control over the territory's future. The Mitchell woman must know about this. Explains why she's been so resistant to selling, even with the bank pressing them. She's clever, Robert acknowledged. Been quietly buying up small water rights throughout the valley, positioning the ranch as a crucial supply point for neighboring properties. Building alliances through mutual dependency. A newcomer entered the saloon. Frank Cassidy, the corrupt bank manager who'd been helping the Mackenzies pressure vulnerable ranches. His expensive suit was speckled with rain, his expression carrying urgent news. Gentlemen, Cassidy said quietly, joining their table, just received a telegraph from our associates in Prescott. Seems someone's been asking very specific questions about your recent property acquisitions. Professional investigators, by the sound of it. Michael's expression hardened slightly. Territory's crawling with marshals lately. Governor's been under pressure to address all these convenient ranch fires. This is different, Cassidy insisted. These men aren't just following official channels, they're digging deep. Bank records, property transfers, insurance claims, building a comprehensive case. The Mackenzie brothers exchanged significant looks. Their success relied on maintaining a veneer of legitimacy, using corrupt officials and compromised businessmen to make their takeovers appear legal. Professional investigators who knew where to look could expose the entire operation. More reason to move quickly on Willow Creek, William concluded. Once we control the water rights, we'll have leverage over the entire territory's economic future. Even the governor will have to back off. James remained focused on the Cooper situation. If he really is Hawkins, he'll have connections. The kind of man who took down the Clayton brothers doesn't operate completely alone. Already considered that, Michael assured him. Our friends in the telegraph office will monitor all communications in and out of the territory. Judge Wilson's absence means no official warrants can be issued. Sheriff Reeves will ensure local law enforcement stays occupied with convenient distractions. The piano player's fingers moved smoothly across the keys, maintaining his cover while committing every detail to memory. The Mackenzies' plan was more ambitious than anyone had suspected. They weren't just building a criminal empire, they were positioning themselves to control the territory's very future. A flash of lightning illuminated the street outside, briefly, revealing a mounted figure passing quickly through the rain. None of the Mackenzies noticed, but the piano player recognized the rider's silhouette. One of Sarah Mitchell's trusted hands, moving with the urgency of someone carrying vital information. The brothers continued refining their strategy, each adding elements that showcased why they'd become the most feared gang in 3 territories. Michael's comprehensive planning, William's financial machinations, Robert's surveillance expertise, and James's calculated brutality had created an operation that seemed unstoppable. But for all their preparation, they'd missed something crucial. Sometimes the deadliest predators are the ones who've learned to hide in plain sight, and some legends are dangerous precisely because everyone thinks they're just stories. The storm gathering over Silver Springs wasn't just bringing rain to the drought-parched land, it was bringing a reckoning that had been building for far longer than anyone suspected. Dawn broke over Willow Creek Valley through scattered storm clouds, revealing the aftermath of the night's rain. Thomas Cooper stood in the ranch's grain storage barn, carefully moving aside a stack of empty crates to reveal a hidden trap door. The early morning light filtering through the barn slats caught the gleam of well-maintained weapons stored beneath. The floorboards, not the tools of a ranch hand, but the carefully curated arsenal of a professional. "So, this is where you keep your insurance policies," a quiet voice observed. Eleanor Reed, the town's telegraph operator, emerged from the shadows near the barn entrance. At 55, her silver-streaked hair and wire-rimmed spectacles projected an image of harmless respectability that had served her well for decades. You would guess she'd once been one of the Pinkerton Agency's most effective undercover operatives. Always wondered how you got your information so quickly, Thomas replied, recognizing a fellow professional. The piano player at the Lucky Strike. Works for you. Eleanor's slight smile confirmed his deduction. Matthew's been tracking the Mackenzies for 8 months, built quite a file on their operation. But last night's intelligence changes everything. They're not just after the ranch, they're positioning to control the territory's water supply. Thomas nodded grimly, retrieving a carefully wrapped package from the hidden compartment. Inside, a matched pair of custom Remingtons gleamed dully in the early light. Weapons he'd hoped never to use again, specially modified for the lightning-fast draw that had earned him his legendary nickname. You're not the only one who's been preparing, Eleanor continued, producing a leather portfolio filled with documents. Every property transfer the Mackenzies have engineered, every corrupted official, every connection to their financial backers, it's all documented. The territorial governor's investigators have been building a case for months. But Judge Wilson's convenient absence means no warrants can be issued, Thomas noted, checking his weapons with practiced efficiency. And Sheriff Reeves is compromised, which is why we've had to be creative. Eleanor moved to the barn door, checking that they remained unobserved. Remember Clara Bennett, the schoolteacher who left town suddenly last month? She's actually a federal prosecutor, gathering evidence for a larger case. The Mackenzies aren't just building a local criminal empire, they're part of something bigger. The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Through gaps in the barn wall, they watched Sarah Mitchell leading a small group of riders toward the main house. Thomas recognized faces he hadn't expected to see. Benjamin Parker, who ran the general store in Silver Springs. Margaret Sullivan, the town's respected doctor. Edward Hayes, a quiet bookkeeper who handled accounts for several local ranches. Your network's bigger than I imagined, Thomas observed, noting how the arrivals moved with the coordinated precision of people accustomed to working together. Sarah Mitchell's been instrumental in building it, Eleanor explained. While everyone saw a young woman struggling to manage a ranch, she was quietly creating alliances throughout the territory. Every business the Mackenzies tried to pressure, every property they threatened, she found ways to help them resist the water rights purchases, Thomas realized. She wasn't just securing resources for Willow Creek, she was building a coalition of mutual support. Precisely. The Mackenzies think they're targeting an isolated ranch. Instead, they're walking into the center of a carefully constructed web of resistance. Every store that extends credit to pressured ranchers, every doctor who treats injuries. Without asking questions, every banker who warns about suspicious financial movements, they're all part of the network. Thomas absorbed this information with tactical appreciation. He'd walked away from violence 5 years ago, seeking peace in honest work. But Sarah and Eleanor had built something more powerful than any gunfighter's reputation, a community united against corruption. The barn door opened, admitting Sarah Mitchell and Benjamin Parker. The storekeeper's usual jovial manner was replaced by focused intensity. Mackenzies made their move, he reported quietly. Just got word from our man in there.
Bank.
They're calling in loans across the territory, trying to trigger a financial panic before they move on Willow Creek. Expected that, Sarah replied calmly. Margaret's already implementing our countermeasures. Every threatened business is transferring accounts to banks outside the territory. By noon, Cassidy will discover his leverage isn't nearly as strong as he thought. Eleanor produced another document from her portfolio. Clara's sources confirmed something else. The Mackenzies' water rights scheme? They're not the architects. They're just enforcers for larger interests. Railroad consortiums looking to control Territorial development. James Mackenzie may handle the violence, but the real power lies in corporate boardrooms back east. The implications were significant. This wasn't just about defending one ranch or exposing local criminals. They were up against organized corruption that reached far beyond the territory's borders. A coded knock at the barn's side door heralded Matthew's arrival. The piano player's gentle appearance belied sharp eyes that missed nothing. James Mackenzie's asking specific questions about Thomas, he reported. They're connecting the dots about his real identity, but that's not urgent news. They're bringing in additional muscle, professional gunmen from 3 territories. Whatever they're planning, they want overwhelming force. Sarah's expression remained composed, though Thomas noted the slight tension in her shoulders. How long? 2 days, maybe 3. They're gathering south of Silver Springs, trying to stay discreet. But there's something else. Matthew hesitated, briefly. Some of the hired guns, they're men who've challenged Hawkins before. Survivors who've studied his style, learned his patterns. Thomas felt the familiar stillness settle over him, the tactical focus that had once made him legendary. The Mackenzies weren't just hiring additional force. They were specifically recruiting men who might counter his abilities. They still think they're dealing with isolated resistance, Sarah observed, her mind clearly processing strategic implications. They don't realize every move they make is being watched, documented, added to Clara's case files. Eleanor nodded. Agreement. Their own preparations are becoming evidence against them. Every gunman they hire, every loan they call in, every official they pressure, it all proves the scope of their operation. The sound of more approaching riders drew their attention. Through the barn walls, they could see dust rising from the southern road. Right on schedule, Benjamin commented, checking his pocket watch. That'll be Edward's people, bringing records from compromised banks. Amazing how many ledger copies find their way to us when corrupt bankers get careless. Thomas studied his companions with growing appreciation. While he'd been maintaining his cover as a simple ranch hand, these people had built something remarkable. Not just a defensive network, but a comprehensive system for exposing and fighting corruption. A flash of movement caught his eye, a signal mirror on a distant ridge using the morning sun to transmit coded messages. Throughout the valley, similar signals were being exchanged, coordinating activities the Mackenzies would never suspect. We've got confirmation, Matthew reported, decoding the signals. Their advanced scouts are already in position around the valley. Professional work, they're establishing clear fields of fire, identifying approaches, military precision, which means they'll be watching for standard defensive preparations, Thomas noted. Expecting us to fortify buildings, set up obvious firing positions. Sarah's slight smile suggested she'd anticipated this. Let them watch. Everything they see is exactly what we want them to notice. Every defensive position they identify is meant to draw attention from our real preparations. Speaking of preparations, Eleanor interjected, Clara's team finished documenting the Mackenzies' connection to the railroad consortium. The evidence is compelling. Financial transfers, coded, telegrams, meeting records. When this breaks, it won't just expose local corruption. It'll reveal how corporate interests use violence to control territorial development. The implications hung in the air as morning sunlight filled the barn. Thomas Cooper had come to Willow Creek seeking peace, trying to leave behind the legend of Lightning Hawkins. Instead, he'd found himself at the center of something far more significant, a community's carefully coordinated stand against systematic corruption. Through the barn's open door, they could see more dust rising on the horizon. Throughout the valley, forces were gathering, not just the Mackenzies' hired guns, but also the hidden networks of resistance that had been building strength for years. The coming confrontation wouldn't be decided by fast draws or accurate shooting. but by the power of united communities standing against corruption. A subtle bird call from the ridge caught Eleanor's attention. Rachel's signal, she noted, recognizing the distinctive pattern used by their youngest scout. More riders approaching from the east, not Mackenzie's men, different riding style. Through his spyglass, Thomas studied the approaching group. Their manner of riding suggested military training, but not current service. Veterans, he concluded, cavalry by their formation, moving like they're used to working together. Sarah nodded in confirmation. Captain Anderson's men. They served together in the 4th Cavalry, retired here after the Apache campaigns, been quietly helping train our people in defensive tactics. The Mackenzies think they're facing untrained ranchers. They don't realize how many experienced fighters have chosen to settle in this valley. Speaking of training, Benjamin added, Margaret's turned her clinic into quite the operation. Every deputy and ranch hand she treats learns basic field medicine. Whole network of people who can handle injuries without drawing attention. Eleanor produced another document from her seemingly endless portfolio. Clara's team mapped the Mackenzies' entire operation. Look at the pattern. Every territory they've moved into, they follow the same sequence. Corrupt local officials, pressure businesses, isolate targets, but they've never faced organized resistance on this scale. The sound of hammering drifted from the main ranch house, where workers appeared to be fortifying windows and doors. Let them watch that, Sarah said quietly. Every obvious preparation they observe is meant to draw attention from our real defenses. Thomas studied the activity with professional appreciation. The apparent defensive work was competent, but obvious, exactly what experienced gunmen would expect to see. The real preparations, the carefully hidden firing positions and escape routes, were disguised as routine ranch maintenance. One more thing, Matthew added, keeping his voice low. Found out why James Mackenzie's so interested in your identity, Thomas. His father was one of the Clayton brothers' lieutenants. Man's been nursing a grudge for years, waiting for a chance at the legend who brought down his family's operation. The revelation added new complexity to the coming confrontation. James Mackenzie wasn't just a professional enforcer. He had personal motivation for wanting to draw out Lightning Hawkins. Through the barn's open door, they could see more dust rising on multiple horizons. Forces were gathering throughout the valley, not just the Mackenzies' hired guns, but also the hidden networks of resistance that had been building strength for years. The coming conflict wouldn't be decided by fast draws or accurate shooting, but by the power of united communities standing against systematic corruption. As Thomas secured his hidden arsenal, he realized that Sarah Mitchell's network wasn't just about defending against immediate threats. She'd built something that could outlast any gunfighter's reputation, a community prepared to stand together against corruption in all its forms. The Mackenzies thought they were moving against an isolated ranch protected by a legendary duelist. Instead, they were about to discover what happens when people choose to unite against those who would rule through fear and violence. Midday sun cast harsh shadows across Willow Creek Ranch as James Mackenzie's group approached the main house. The youngest Mackenzie brother rode slightly ahead, his black duster catching the wind, creating a deliberately intimidating silhouette. Behind him, 6 experienced gunmen spread out in a practiced formation, each taking positions that suggested extensive tactical training. Thomas Cooper observed their approach from the apparent vulnerability of the front porch, maintaining his ranch hand persona while noting every detail. The hired guns were professionals, Mexican war veterans by their bearing, men accustomed to violence but disciplined in its application. Their weapons were quality pieces, well maintained and modified for quick action. Sarah Mitchell stepped out onto the porch, her businesslike manner masking careful tactical assessment. She'd positioned herself precisely where the afternoon sun would force Mackenzie to squint slightly when looking at her, a small advantage, but potentially crucial. In what was to come, "Miss Mitchell," James called out, his voice carrying calculated warmth. "Beautiful day for a ride. Thought we might discuss a business proposition if you've got a moment." "Mr. Mackenzie." Sarah's tone was perfectly cordial, though Thomas noted how her right hand stayed near the concealed derringer in her skirt pocket. "Quite a few men for a simple business discussion." James's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Dangerous times, ma'am. Can't be too careful with all these unfortunate accidents happening to local ranches. Speaking of which, how's your father recovering?" The subtle threat in his reference to Jack Mitchell's accident hung in the air. Before Sarah could respond, movement at the barn caught everyone's attention. Benjamin Parker emerged, leading his wagon loaded with store supplies. His appearance seemed perfectly natural, the general store owner making his regular deliveries. What the Mackenzies couldn't know was that Benjamin's wagon contained more than simple provisions. Hidden beneath feed sacks and dry goods were coded messages and tactical supplies being distributed throughout the valley's resistance network. His regular deliveries provided perfect cover for coordinating their preparations. "Afternoon, Miss Sarah," Benjamin called out cheerfully, playing his role perfectly. "Got those special orders you requested? And some interesting news from town. If you've got a moment." Thomas noticed how James's gunmen shifted positions slightly, adjusting their coverage to account for Benjamin's presence. These weren't common thugs. They understood tactical dynamics, recognized potential threats. The one on the far left, a grizzled man with a distinctive cavalry sword scar, kept his horse positioned for quick action while maintaining clear sightlines across the property. "Always time for news, Mr. Parker," Sarah replied, her casual tone masking the significance of this rehearsed exchange. Benjamin's interesting news was actually coded confirmation that Captain Anderson's veterans were in position throughout the valley, ready to counter any aggressive moves by Mackenzie's forces. James dismounted with practiced grace, his movements controlled and precise. "Don't let us interrupt your business, Miss Mitchell, though I hope you'll spare a moment to discuss an opportunity that could solve all your recent financial difficulties." The emphasis he placed on those last words carried clear meaning. The Mackenzies had been pressuring local banks, manipulating loan terms to force ranchers into desperate situations. But what James didn't know was that Sarah had already moved most of Willow Creek's debts to banks outside their influence, protected by Eleanor Reed's network of financial contacts. "Actually, Mr. Mackenzie," Sarah responded with subtle satisfaction, "our financial situation has recently improved. Several investors expressed interest in partnering with Willow Creek, particularly regarding our water rights management program." Thomas caught the slight tension in James's shoulders, the first crack in his confident demeanor. The Mackenzies had counted on financial pressure, making the ranch vulnerable. Sarah's hint at outside investment threatened to disrupt their carefully planned takeover. "Interesting," James replied, his voice carrying dangerous undertones. "Though investing in this region can be risky, never know when accidents might impact property values. Would hate to see your new partners lose their investment due to unfortunate circumstances." As if on cue, more riders appeared on the ridge overlooking the ranch, Robert Mackenzie and 4 more gunmen, positioning themselves to demonstrate the force they could bring to bear. Their placement was professional, designed to convey threatening capability while maintaining tactical advantage. Thomas maintained his simple ranch hand posture, though his mind was calculating angles and approaches with the precision that had once made him legendary. The Mackenzies' display of force was impressive, but they'd missed crucial details. The way Benjamin's wagon was positioned, slightly blocking their cleanest firing lines. How Sarah stood exactly where the sun's glare would interfere with snapshots from the ridge. Speaking of partners, James continued, his eyes shifting to Thomas, been hearing interesting things about your ranch hands, Miss Mitchell. Particularly this fellow. Seems he's got quite a background in handling difficult situations. The moment stretched taut as James studied Thomas with predatory intensity. You know, it reminded me of stories I heard as a kid. Tales about a certain gunman who had a particular way of carrying himself. Man called Lightning Hawkins. Thomas felt the familiar stillness settle over him, the deadly calm that had earned him his legendary nickname. But he kept his ranch hand persona firmly in place, meeting James's stare with carefully maintained confusion. "Don't follow those kinds of stories much, Mr. Mackenzie," he replied mildly, too busy with ranch work to pay attention to gunfighter tales. But James wasn't finished. His next words carried personal weight that explained his obsession with uncovering Thomas's true identity. "My father used to tell those stories, right up until Hawkins brought down the Clayton brothers operation. Father was their lieutenant, you see. Never came home after that night. The revelation hung in the air like gun smoke." James Mackenzie wasn't just a professional enforcer. He was a man seeking revenge for family destruction. His interest in exposing Lightning Hawkins went beyond simple tactical advantage. "Funny thing about legends," James continued, his hand resting casually near his gun. "They never seem to die properly. Always someone claiming to have seen them, hiding out in quiet places, working simple jobs, trying to leave the past behind." Sarah's voice cut through the tension. "Sounds like you've given this a lot of thought, Mr. Mackenzie. Though I'm curious, why would a simple business discussion require so much armed persuasion?" Her question drew attention to the growing number of gunmen visible on the surrounding ridges. The Mackenzies were deliberately displaying their strength, trying to intimidate through overwhelming force. What they couldn't know was that every position they took was being noted by hidden observers throughout the valley. "Insurance, Miss Mitchell, nothing more." James's smile remained cold. "Though I should mention, Judge Wilson's taking an extended vacation, won't be handling any legal complaints for quite a while. And Sheriff Reeves is dealing with a complex situation over in Cedar Springs, probably be occupied for weeks." The message was clear. The Mackenzies had eliminated normal legal recourse, ensuring no official interference with their plans. But they'd overlooked something crucial. Sometimes the deadliest opponents aren't the ones who seek confrontation, but those who've learned to wait for exactly the right moment to reveal their true capabilities. As the tension stretched taut under the midday sun, a new rider appeared on the western approach, Margaret Sullivan, the town doctor, her medical bag prominent on her saddle. Her arrival seemed innocent enough, a routine visit to check on Jack Mitchell's recovery. But Thomas noted how her approach disrupted the Mackenzies' carefully planned firing lines, forcing their ridge riders to adjust positions. "Dr. Sullivan," Sarah greeted, maintaining the appearance of normal ranch business. "Father's been looking forward to your visit. James." Mackenzie's expression flickered slightly, another variable entering his carefully controlled situation. The doctor's presence meant witnesses to any violence, complications for their planned intimidation. More importantly, her arrival demonstrated that Willow Creek Ranch wasn't as isolated as they'd assumed. "Miss Mitchell," Margaret replied, dismounting, with deliberate care that allowed her to survey the gathered gunmen. Her experienced eye, gained from years treating wounds in frontier towns, noted their professional weaponry and tactical positioning. Quite a gathering for a quiet afternoon. Before James could respond, dust on the eastern road announced more arrivals. Edward Hayes, the bookkeeper, rode alongside two ranchers from neighboring properties. Their approach seemed casual, but Thomas recognized the practiced formation of men accustomed to working together. Captain Anderson's training showed in their positioning, the way they naturally covered each other's movements. "Hope we're not interrupting," Edward called out, his mild manner belying sharp observation. "Thought we might discuss those water Rights agreements, Miss Mitchell. Unless you're occupied with other business? James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The Mackenzies' plan had called for isolating Willow Creek, demonstrating that resistance was futile. Instead, every passing minute brought new evidence that the ranch had more connections and support than they'd anticipated. Actually, James interjected smoothly, Miss Mitchell and I were just discussing regional water management ourselves. My associates have considerable experience in helping properties maximize their resources. Fascinating, Edward replied, producing a leather portfolio. I've been reviewing recent water rights transfers throughout the territory, found some interesting patterns in property acquisitions following disputed claims. Perhaps you'd care to examine the documentation. The threat in Edward's offer was subtle but clear. They had evidence of the Mackenzies' systematic manipulation of water rights, proof that could expose their entire operation. James's hand drifted closer to his weapon, but Thomas noted the uncertainty in his movements. The youngest Mackenzie was realizing that his show of force had somehow transformed into a far more complex confrontation. Movement near the barn caught everyone's attention. Benjamin Parker was helping his young assistant unload supplies, their actions drawing focus from more significant activity behind them. Thomas glimpsed Eleanor Reed passing something to one of Sarah's trusted hands, documents bound for Judge Harrison's office, evidence that would bypass the Mackenzies' corrupted local officials. You seem to have quite a community here, James observed, his tone carrying dangerous edges. Lot of people are taking interest in a struggling ranch's business. Neighbors. Help neighbors, Sarah replied calmly. It's how we survive out here, though I suspect that's a foreign concept to some people. The implied criticism struck closer to home than Sarah could know. James Mackenzie had grown up with his father's bitter tales of betrayal, stories of how Lightning Hawkins had turned the Clayton brothers' own men against them. Now he was facing a similar situation, a community united against his attempted takeover, a bird call from the ridge, one of Rachel's signals. More riders approaching from the north, their dust visible against the gathering storm clouds. Thomas recognized the formation, Captain Anderson himself, leading a group of his veterans with the precision that had once made them the territory's most effective cavalry unit. James saw it too. His expression hardened as he recognized the military precision in their approach. These weren't simple ranchers or townspeople. These were experienced fighters, deliberately positioning themselves to counter his forces. Interesting choice of friends, Miss Mitchell, he said softly, almost like you've been expecting trouble, planning for it even. Planning is essential in ranch management, Sarah responded, her calm demeanor carrying steel beneath its surface. Like planning how to maintain water access during droughts, or planning how to protect legitimate businesses from orchestrated theft disguised as legal acquisition. Her words struck with precision, letting James know they understood exactly how his organization operated. The Mackenzies didn't just steal property through violence. They manipulated financial and legal systems to make their takeovers appear legitimate. Thunder rolled in the distance as Captain Anderson's group drew closer. The storm's approach matched the growing tension. But Thomas noted something else, how the gathering clouds would affect visibility, change tactical dynamics. Weather that most would consider an inconvenience had already been incorporated into their defensive preparations. Consider this a formal offer, James declared, his voice carrying across the yard. Willow Creek's debts can disappear. Your father's medical care can be fully funded. All you have to do is sign over controlling interest in the water rights. Simple business transaction. Simple? Margaret Sullivan's tone carried professional disdain. Like Jack Mitchell's accident was simple, or the convenient injuries that plague anyone who resists your business proposals? James's expression showed the first real crack in his controlled demeanor. The doctor's words confirmed his operation had been compromised. They weren't just aware of his methods. They could prove his involvement in previously untraced incidents. The confrontation had shifted in ways the Mackenzies hadn't prepared for. They'd arrived planning to intimidate an isolated ranch through a show of force. Instead, they found themselves facing an organized community that had anticipated and prepared for their tactics. As raindrops began to fall, Thomas maintained his ranch hand pose while noting every tactical detail. The Mackenzies' gunmen were professionals, but they were used to overwhelming unprepared opponents. Now they faced experienced fighters who'd chosen their positions carefully, who understood how weather and terrain could offset numerical advantages. James Mackenzie had come, seeking to expose Lightning Hawkins, to draw out the legend for personal revenge. But he'd overlooked something crucial about legends. Sometimes their greatest power lies not in dramatic confrontation, but in teaching others how to stand against those who would rule through fear and violence. The storm's first serious gusts swept across Willow Creek Valley as James Mackenzie prepared to respond. But forces far more significant than weather were gathering strength. The Mackenzies thought they were orchestrating a simple show of force. Instead, they were about to discover what happens when corruption faces the united strength of people who've chosen to stand together against it. The storm broke over Silver Springs with sudden fury, driving most townsfolk indoors and providing perfect cover for clandestine meetings. In the back room of Eleanor Reed's telegraph office, Clara Bennett, the federal prosecutor, posing as a former schoolteacher, spread a complex web of documents across a worn oak table. Railroad investment records, she explained to the gathered group, traced through 3 different banks and a dozen shell companies. Every property the Mackenzies have targeted connects to this larger pattern. Thomas studied the documentation with professional attention. The papers revealed an intricate network of corporate manipulation that went far beyond simple ranch raids. Burlington Northern Railroad, he noted, recognizing a recurring name in the financial transfers. Exactly, Clara confirmed. They're buying up key properties throughout the territory, using the Mackenzies as their enforcers. Every ranch they burn, every farmer they drive out, it's all about securing right-of-way for their planned expansion. Sarah Mitchell leaned forward, examining land survey maps that showed proposed railroad routes. They're not just after individual properties. They're trying to control entire watersheds, create choke points where they can dictate access to water and transportation. Which explains their obsession with Willow Creek, Edward Hayes added, his accountant's mind assembling the financial puzzle. Your water rights don't just control local access. They're crucial to the railroad's entire regional strategy. A sharp knock at the back door interrupted their discussion. Eleanor's practiced hand moved to her concealed derringer, but the coded pattern identified the visitor as friendly. Matthew, the piano player, slipped inside, shaking rain from his coat. James Mackenzie just received an interesting visitor, he reported, keeping his voice low despite the storm's cover. Augustus Whitaker, Burlington Northern's chief of special operations. Man's got a reputation for handling administrative problems that legal channels can't solve. Clara's expression tightened. Whitaker's been on our radar for years, suspected of orchestrating similar operations in 3 territories, but always maintains deniable distance. Uses local gangs like the Mackenzies to do the dirty work while he keeps his corporate hands clean. Not this time, Eleanor interjected, producing a telegraph transcript. Our friends at the Prescott office intercepted coded messages between Whitaker and the railroad's board of directors. Direct authorization for decisive action regarding resistant property owners. Thomas absorbed this information with tactical assessment. The Mackenzies weren't just acting on their own initiative. They were implementing a corporate strategy of systematic displacement. Whitaker's presence changes things. Men like that don't show up unless they're planning something major Already started, Matthew confirmed. Just before I left town, 3 more gunmen arrived. Different caliber than the Mackenzie's usual muscle. These are corporate professionals, Pinkerton veterans by their bearing. Sarah's mind was already processing strategic implications. They're escalating. Whitaker's arrival means the railroads, tired of waiting. They want Willow Creek's water rights secured before the territorial legislature's next session. Because of this, Clara said, revealing another document, proposed legislation requiring public oversight of water rights transfers. If that passes, corporations won't be able to control water access through proxy ownership. Lightning flashed. Outside, as Eleanor produced more intercepted telegrams. Whitaker's been busy since arriving. Messages to judges in 3 territories, bankers in Chicago, even territorial officials. Man's building quite the network of influence. Not building, Edward corrected, studying financial records, activating. These accounts show regular payments to territorial officials going back months. They've been preparing for this, establishing control over key positions before making their final move. Thomas felt the familiar tactical focus settling over him. This wasn't just about defending one ranch or exposing local criminals. They were facing a coordinated campaign of corporate takeover, using hired guns and corrupted officials to seize control of crucial resources. A coded knock heralded Margaret Sullivan's arrival. The doctor's expression carried urgent news. Whitaker's men just paid Sheriff Reeves another visit. His deputy overheard part of their conversation, something about accelerated timetables and eliminating complications. They're not just pressing us directly, Sarah realized. They're systematically removing any possible source of resistance or investigation. Judge Wilson's absence, Sheriff Reeves's corruption, even the bank's sudden loan policies, it's all coordinated. Clara nodded grimly. Classic corporate strategy. Control or neutralize every potential avenue of opposition before launching their main operation, but they've overlooked something crucial. She produced another set of documents, evidence that had been carefully gathered over months of investigation. Banking records showing suspicious transfers, property deeds with questionable provenance, sworn statements from intimidated landowners. A comprehensive case that connected the Mackenzies' violent acts directly to Burlington Northern's corporate offices. Whitaker's smart, Clara continued. He maintains distance, works through intermediaries, keeps his hands officially clean. But he's never faced an organized resistance network that was documenting everything. Every move they make just adds to our case. Thunder shook the building as Matthew reported more developments. Whitaker's called in additional forces, not just gunmen, legal teams, financial specialists. They're positioning people throughout the territory, preparing for something big. Because of this, Edward interjected, displaying a railroad survey map. These marks show planned water control points. Once they secure key properties like Willow Creek, they can effectively control water access across 3 territories. Anyone who wants to farm, ranch, or mine will have to deal with Burlington Northern. Sarah studied the map with growing concern. They're not just after land for railroad expansion. They're trying to create a monopoly on territorial development, control the water, control the territory's future, which explains why they're moving. Now, Eleanor added, territorial legislature meets in 3 weeks. If we can expose their operation before then, they'll do anything to prevent that, Thomas warned. Whitaker's reputation suggests he eliminates threats permanently. He won't just try to pressure us into selling. He'll want to make examples, ensure no one else dares to resist corporate expansion. Clara's expression hardened. Then we'd better make sure our evidence reaches the right people. I've got contacts in Washington who've been building a broader case against railroad corruption. This could be the proof they need to launch a full federal investigation. Lightning illuminated the room as they studied Whitaker's expanding web of influence. The Mackenzies had been brutal enough as local criminals, but with corporate backing and professional reinforcements, they presented a far more dangerous threat. A subtle bird call from outside, Rachel's warning signal. Through the rain-streaked windows, they glimpsed riders moving through town with professional purpose. Whitaker's men were establishing surveillance points, preparing for their next phase of operations. "They'll target our communications first," Thomas predicted, drawing on years of tactical experience. "Try to isolate us, cut off any chance of outside support or investigation." But Sarah's slight smile suggested confidence rather than concern. "Let them try. Every move they make, every person they pressure, every official they corrupt, it all becomes evidence. They think they're following a proven strategy for corporate takeover. Instead, they're walking into a trap years in the making." The storm's intensity matched the growing tension as more of Whitaker's agents arrived in Silver Springs. "There's something else," Matthew added, producing a crumpled telegram he'd intercepted. "Whitaker's not just calling in corporate enforcers. He's specifically recruiting men with military intelligence backgrounds." "Makes sense," Thomas observed. "Standard military intelligence tactics: identify communication networks, isolate resistance points, systematically eliminate coordination. Capabilities." Clara spread out another set of documents, these bearing official army seals. "Whitaker's background is interesting. Served in army intelligence during the war, specialized in disrupting Confederate supply lines. After the war, he applied those same techniques to corporate acquisitions." "Look at this pattern," Edward noted, comparing financial records. "Every territory where Whitaker's operated shows the same sequence. First, they compromise local officials. Then they pressure banks to call in loans. Finally, they trigger accidents that eliminate key resistance figures." Eleanor produced more intercepted messages. "He's already started here. These telegrams show systematic pressure being applied to every business that might support resistance. Feed suppliers, equipment dealers, even medical suppliers, they're all being threatened with financial retaliation." "But they've overlooked something," Sarah pointed out. "Every business they threaten becomes evidence of corporate conspiracy. Their own pressure tactics prove the connection between the Mackenzies' violence and Burlington Northern's expansion plans. A new arrival slipped through the back door, Benjamin Parker bearing urgent news. Whitaker's men are establishing control points around town. Professional work. They're positioned to monitor all major roads and communication routes. Not just monitoring, Thomas added, his tactical assessment noting deeper implications. Those positions could become blockade points, control movement in and out of the territory, isolate any resistance. Clara's expression showed grim understanding. Classic corporate encirclement. They're not just targeting individual properties anymore. They're trying to establish complete control over territorial commerce and communication. Margaret Sullivan arrived next, her medical bag providing perfect cover for carrying sensitive documents. "It's worse than we thought. Whitaker's bringing in specialists, not just gunmen, but experts in property law, water rights, territorial regulations. They're building a comprehensive legal framework to justify their takeover." Edward studied new financial records with growing concern. "They're not just buying properties. They're systematically acquiring controlling interest in every business crucial to territorial development. Equipment suppliers, cattle brokers, mining operations. Burlington Northern's creating a complete monopoly on economic activity." "Which explains this," Eleanor added, revealing another intercepted message. "Instructions from Burlington Northern's Board of Directors. They're not just planning a railroad, they're establishing infrastructure to control the territory's entire future." Development. Lightning illuminated the room as Thomas processed these revelations with tactical precision. Whitaker's men aren't just enforcers, they're advanced units, preparing the territory for complete corporate takeover. already happening, Matthew reported. Every bank in 3 territories just received identical instructions. They're calling in loans, cancelling credit lines, freezing accounts. Anyone who might support resistance will find themselves financially crippled. Sarah studied the evidence with analytical focus. They're not just targeting current opposition, they're eliminating any possibility of future resistance. Once they control water access and transportation, they'll dictate terms to every farmer, rancher and merchant in the territory. But their own thoroughness works against them, Clara noted, organizing evidence files. Every financial move, every property transfer, every corrupted official, it all demonstrates the scope of their conspiracy. They're not just committing isolated crimes. They're implementing a systematic plan of corporate conquest. Thunder shook the building as Benjamin reported more developments. Whitaker's brought in telegraph specialists. They're establishing a private communication network, completely separate from regular territorial lines. Smart, Thomas acknowledged. Military technique. Create secure communication channels while monitoring or disrupting enemy coordination. Man's applying battlefield strategy to corporate takeover. Eleanor's slight smile suggested this development didn't surprise her. Let them build their network. Every message they send becomes evidence. Their own security works against them. They'll never suspect that we've been documenting their entire operation. Sarah unrolled another map, this one showing water sources throughout 3 territories. Look at their planned control points. Once they secure key watersheds, they'll effectively control all regional development. No one will be able to establish new ranches, farms, or businesses without Burlington Northern's permission, which is why they're moving so aggressively now, Clara explained. Territorial legislature's upcoming session could change everything. If more evidence exposes their operation, it won't just stop their expansion. It'll trigger a federal investigation of their entire corporate empire. Through rain-streaked windows, they watched Whitaker's men continuing their methodical occupation of Silver Springs. Corporate agents moved with military precision, establishing control points and surveillance positions. They were implementing a proven strategy of systematic takeover, never suspecting that every move they made was being documented, and added to a case that could expose decades of corporate corruption. The storm's fury matched the growing tension as Burlington Northern's forces gathered strength. But in Eleanor Reed's back room, a different kind of force was assembling, not through violence or intimidation, but through careful documentation of corporate corruption. Whitaker thought he was implementing a standard operation of systematic control. Instead, he was walking into a trap that had been waiting for precisely this kind of corporate overreach. Thunder rolled across Silver Springs as the group finalized their plans. The coming confrontation wouldn't be decided by gunfights in the street, but by the power of documented evidence exposing corruption at its highest levels. And somewhere in Washington, federal investigators were about to receive proof of a corporate conspiracy that would shake the very foundations of railroad expansion in the territories. Sunrise painted the eastern sky in shades of crimson as captain. Nathan Anderson stood at his barn window, studying the distant dust trails of Whitaker's patrols. The former cavalry officer's weathered face showed quiet satisfaction. The corporate agents were establishing exactly the surveillance patterns he'd predicted. "They're good," he commented to Thomas Cooper, who'd arrived under cover of dawn. "Military precision in their movements. But they're following standard Army reconnaissance doctrine, makes them predictable." Inside the barn, Anderson's network was already mobilizing. A dozen veterans of his old cavalry unit checked weapons and equipment with practiced efficiency. These weren't simple ranch hands playing at soldiers. They were experienced fighters who'd chosen to settle in the territory, maintaining their skills while building peaceful lives. "Spotted 3 more observation posts overnight," reported Daniel Foster, Anderson's former scout. The young man's Apache-trained tracking skills had served them well during the campaigns, and now they provided crucial intelligence about Whitaker's operations. They're establishing a classic encirclement pattern, but leaving gaps they think we won't notice. Thomas studied the detailed maps spread across Anderson's planning table. Red marks showed confirmed corporate agent positions, while blue indicated their own prepared response points. They're positioned to control major roads and communication routes, standard military strategy for isolating resistance. Exactly what we wanted them to think, Anderson replied with grim satisfaction. While they're watching obvious routes, our supply lines stay hidden. Every ranch hand drives cattle. Every merchant's wagon makes deliveries. They're all part of our distribution network. The barn door opened, admitting Rachel Chen, their youngest scout. Her slight build and unassuming manner made her perfect for reconnaissance. Corporate agents dismissed her as a harmless local girl, never suspecting her military intelligence training. Whitaker's brought in more specialists, she reported precisely. Telegraph experts setting up private communication lines, legal teams establishing offices in town, financial agents visiting local banks. They're building infrastructure for long-term control. "Show them, Nathan," a quiet voice instructed. Sarah Mitchell emerged from the shadows, where she'd been conferring with Eleanor Reed about coordinating their next moves. "Let Thomas see what we've really been preparing." Anderson nodded, moving to a concealed lever disguised as a routine barn fitting. The floor shifted, revealing a hidden chamber that demonstrated just how thoroughly they'd prepared for this confrontation. Below, an elaborate command center spread across the hidden space. Maps covered the walls, showing not just local terrain, but positions throughout 3 territories. Communications equipment, some of it military surplus, some custom-built by Eleanor's network of telegraph specialists, provided secure channels for coordinating resistance activities. "We've been ready for corporate takeover attempts," Anderson explained as they descended. "Saw it happen in other territories. Railroads using hired guns and corrupted officials to seize control of crucial resources. Built this network so it couldn't happen here." Thomas surveyed the operation with professional appreciation. This wasn't just a local defensive setup, it was a sophisticated coordination center for territory-wide resistance. "How many people are part of this?" "More than Whitaker suspects," Sarah replied. "Every community where they've tried their tactics, we've found allies. Ranchers, merchants, telegraph operators, even bank clerks who've seen corporate corruption firsthand. They all contribute intelligence, support our supply lines, and help maintain communication networks." Rachel indicated specific map points. "These markers show confirmed corporate agent positions. But these," she pointed to dozens of blue marks, "represent our response teams, veterans, experienced fighters, people who've chosen to stand against systematic corruption. And these," Anderson added, revealing another map layer, "show our supply caches, medical supplies, ammunition, emergency provisions, everything needed to sustain long-term resistance. All positioned before Whitaker's people arrived, distributed through legitimate business operations they'd never suspect." The hidden chamber hummed with activity as Anderson's veterans coordinated with other resistance cells. Through Eleanor's secure telegraph network, they received updates from throughout the territory: corporate agent movements, official corruption attempts, pressure on local businesses. Whitaker's implementing standard military counterinsurgency tactics, Anderson noted. Isolate communities, control resources, eliminate coordination capabilities. But he's overlooking something crucial. "We're not insurgents," Thomas understood. "You've built legitimate business networks, established legal supply lines, created official documentation of every corporate action. They're trying to fight shadows, while exposing themselves to legal consequences." Sarah nodded in confirmation. "Every move they make, every pressure tactic they implement, every official they corrupt, it all becomes evidence." Clara's federal investigation team gets daily updates, building a comprehensive case against corporate overreach. New signals arrived through their secure channels. Rachel translated rapid fire. Whitaker's men established additional checkpoints on major roads. They're implementing systematic cargo inspections, trying to identify resistant supply lines. Let them, Anderson replied with professional satisfaction. While they're focusing on obvious routes, our real supply network keeps functioning. Every ranch hand moving cattle, every merchant's wagon making deliveries, they're all part of our distribution system. Thomas studied their operation with growing appreciation. During his years as Lightning Hawkins, he'd specialized in direct confrontation, using superior skill and tactical knowledge to overcome opponents. But Anderson and Sarah had built something far more sophisticated, a comprehensive network that turned corporate tactics against themselves. "Report from Benjamin Parker," Rachel announced, translating another signal. "Whitaker's legal team filed emergency injunctions against 6 local ranches. They're trying to freeze property transfers, preventing owners from protecting their water rights." "Right on schedule," Sarah commented. "While they're focused on legal maneuvers, our documentation of their tactics reaches federal investigators. Every injunction they file becomes evidence of coordinated corporate takeover attempts." Anderson moved to another map section, this one showing regional water sources. Whitaker thinks controlling key watersheds will give him power over territorial development, but he's overlooking crucial details about water rights law. "Our legal team's been building cases for months, documenting how corporate manipulation violates territorial statutes." The hidden chamber's activity increased as more signals arrived. Throughout the territory, resistance cells were activating in careful coordination, not through violence or direct confrontation, but through systematic documentation and legal preparation. "Signal from Margaret Sullivan," Rachel reported. "Corporate agents pressuring medical suppliers, trying to control distribution of crucial supplies. But our alternative supply lines are already established. Every pressure attempt just adds to our evidence of systematic corporate interference." Thomas watched their operation with tactical assessment. Anderson's military experience showed in the precise coordination, the careful preparation, the way they'd anticipated and countered corporate tactics. But this wasn't just a military operation. It was a sophisticated network of legitimate businesses and concerned citizens standing against systematic corruption. "They're implementing their standard strategy," Anderson observed. "Isolate pressure, eliminate resistance, but they've never faced opposition that was prepared for their tactics, that documented every move they made." Whitaker's military background makes him predictable. He sees this as a tactical problem to solve through force and control. "While we've built something different," Sarah added. "Not just defensive preparations, but a comprehensive network for exposing corporate corruption. Every action they take, thinking they're establishing control, actually strengthens our legal case against them." Through concealed observation posts, they watched Whitaker's agents continuing their methodical occupation of key positions. The corporate forces moved with professional precision, implementing proven tactics for systematic control, but they had no idea they faced something unprecedented, a community that had spent years preparing not just to resist, but to expose corruption at its highest levels. The rising sun illuminated dust trails as more corporate agents arrived, establishing additional control points. A rapid series of signals caught Rachel's attention, updates from their observation network throughout the territory. "Multiple reports coming in," she translated quickly. "Whitaker's implementing coordinated financial pressure across 3 territories. Every bank connected to Burlington Northern just called in loans from suspected resistance supporters." "Perfect," Sarah responded, surprising Thomas with her satisfaction. "While they're focused on financial warfare, our alternative banking network activates." "Show him, Edward." The accountant emerged from his workstation, carrying detailed financial records. Every threatened business has already transferred crucial assets to secure accounts outside corporate control. Banks in Denver, Salt Lake City, even Chicago, all managed by associates who've seen railroad corruption firsthand and chosen to help fight it. Anderson indicated another map section, this one showing regional business connections. It's not just about money. Every merchant they pressure, every supplier they threaten, they're all part of larger commercial networks. Networks we've spent years building specifically to counter corporate control attempts. Signal from Clara's team, Rachel reported. Federal investigators just received comprehensive documentation of Burlington Northern's pressure tactics. Every loan called in, every account frozen. It all demonstrates coordinated corporate attempts to control territorial commerce. Thomas studied their operation with growing appreciation. This wasn't just military precision or business acumen. It was a sophisticated fusion of multiple resistance strategies. You've built something remarkable here, not just defensive preparations, but a comprehensive system for exposing and countering corporate corruption. Learned from previous railroad takeovers, Anderson explained. They always follow the same pattern. Isolated communities, control resources, eliminate resistance. But they've never faced opponents who understood their tactics and prepared specifically to counter them. New signals arrived through their secure channels. Rachel's hands moved rapidly over the telegraph key, coordinating responses throughout their network. Whitaker's men implemented systematic cargo inspections on all major roads. They're trying to identify and disrupt our supply lines. Let them waste time checking wagons, Anderson replied with professional satisfaction. Every inspection they conduct becomes documented evidence of corporate interference with legitimate commerce. Meanwhile, our real supply network continues functioning through channels they'll never suspect. Daniel Foster returned from his scouting run, bringing crucial updates. They're establishing forward positions here and here, he indicated on the map. Standard military doctrine for controlling territory, but they've missed something significant. The old Apache trails, Thomas recognized, his tactical experience noting the oversight. They're following formal military patterns, never considering traditional routes through the territory. Exactly, Foster confirmed. While they're focused on obvious roads and passes, our native allies maintain completely separate supply lines. Routes that don't appear on any official maps. Sarah revealed another layer of their preparation, detailed documentation of traditional tribal pathways throughout the territory. Every community that's faced corporate pressure, every group that's seen railroad corruption, they all contribute to our network. Knowledge passed down through generations becomes crucial to resisting modern corporate takeover attempts. Signal. From Margaret's clinic, Rachel announced, corporate agents pressuring medical suppliers, trying to control distribution of crucial supplies. But our alternative supply lines are already established. Every pressure attempt just adds to our evidence of systematic corporate interference. The hidden command center hummed with coordinated activity as more resistance cells activated throughout the territory. Anderson's veterans maintained military precision in their operations, but this wasn't just a tactical response. It was a sophisticated network of legitimate businesses and concerned citizens standing against systematic corruption. Report from Benjamin's store. Rachel translated another signal. Whitaker's legal team filed emergency injunctions against local merchants. They're trying to prevent businesses from supporting suspected resistance members. Which triggers this, Sarah said with satisfaction, revealing another set of prepared documents. Every injunction they file becomes evidence of coordinated corporate attempts to control territorial commerce. Our legal team's been building these cases for months, documenting how their tactics violate territorial statutes. Thomas watched their operation with tactical assessment. You haven't just prepared for physical confrontation, you've built a comprehensive system for exposing and countering every aspect of corporate takeover attempts. Had to, Anderson replied grimly. Seen. Too many communities fall to railroad expansion. They don't just use violence. They manipulate legal systems, control commerce, pressure legitimate businesses. So we built something that turns their own tactics against them. New signals arrived, indicating increased corporate activity throughout the territory. Whitaker's agents moved with military precision, implementing proven strategies for systematic control. But they had no idea they faced something unprecedented, a community that had spent years preparing not just to resist, but to expose corruption at its highest levels. Through concealed observation posts, they watched more corporate forces arriving. Professional agents establishing control points, legal teams preparing injunctions, financial specialists implementing pressure tactics. But in Anderson's hidden command center, a different kind of force was mobilizing, not through violence or intimidation, but through careful documentation and legal preparation. The morning sun climbed higher as Whitaker's operation continued expanding. But he was about to discover that his military background, his corporate resources, his professional agents, none of it had prepared him for facing a community that had turned his own tactics into weapons against corporate corruption. Augustus. Whitaker stood at the window of his newly established office in Silver Springs, his military bearing evident even in stillness. Through expensive tailored clothing that marked him as Burlington Northern's representative, keen eyes studied the town with tactical assessment. At 58, his steel-gray hair and aristocratic features projected corporate authority, but his gaze carried the cold calculation of someone accustomed to solving problems through decisive action. Interesting report from our financial team, Michael Mackenzie said, entering the office. Every bank account we've frozen, every loan we've called in, the targets seem completely unaffected. Money's moving through channels we can't trace. Whitaker's expression tightened slightly. In every previous territory, financial pressure had proven devastatingly effective. Show me the specifics. Michael produced detailed records, threatened businesses continuing operations without local bank support, supplies reaching pressured ranches despite our cargo inspections. Someone's built an entire parallel financial network outside our control. Not just financial, James Mackenzie added, joining them. The youngest brother's usual confidence showed signs of strain. Our legal team's injunctions keep hitting unexpected obstacles. Every property transfer we challenge, every water right we contest, they've got counter-documentation ready, filed months or even years in advance. Whitaker absorbed this information with growing concern. Throughout his career, enforcing railroad interests, he'd never encountered such thoroughly prepared resistance. What about their communications? Our telegraph specialists should have isolated them by now. That's another problem, Michael replied. We control all official telegraph lines, but information's still moving throughout the territory. Messages reaching federal officials, evidence appearing in unexpected places. They've got channels we can't identify. The corporate enforcer moved to a map showing their established control points. Everything followed proven military doctrine, key positions secured, routes monitored, resources controlled. But somehow, the resistance remained coordinated, unaffected by tactical isolation attempts. The Cooper situation? Whitaker inquired. James's suspicions about the ranch hand's true identity had caught his attention. A legendary gunfighter hiding as a simple worker suggested sophisticated opposition. Confirmed, James responded, his voice carrying a personal edge. Multiple sources now verify he's Lightning Hawkins, man who destroyed the Clayton brothers. Operation, who never lost a confrontation, been hiding at Willow Creek Ranch for 5 years. Whitaker's mind processed tactical implications. Interesting timing. 5 years ago, Burlington Northern began expanding operations in this territory, started implementing our standard acquisition strategy. You think he knew? Michael asked. That he positioned himself here deliberately, preparing for our eventual arrival. More importantly, Whitaker replied, who else has been preparing? This level of resistance suggests long-term coordination, professional planning, military precision. A knock at the door announced Robert Mackenzie's arrival. The gang's tracker carried fresh intelligence. Found something interesting checking. Your property records. Captain Nathan Anderson, former 4th Cavalry Commander. He's been quietly buying land throughout the territory, small parcels, nothing suspicious individually, but together they create a network of connected properties. Whitaker's expression hardened. He recognized Anderson's name. The cavalry officer had earned a reputation for sophisticated tactical operations during the Apache campaigns. Show me these properties on the map. As Robert indicated positions, a pattern emerged. Anderson's seemingly random land purchases created a web of connected safe points and supply routes. Military strategy, Whitaker noted, using terrain knowledge to establish secure networks. Man's been preparing for territorial-scale resistance. There's more, Robert continued. Every community where we've faced unexpected opposition found connections to Anderson's old unit. Veterans settled throughout the territory, maintaining military-style organization under cover of normal civilian life. James studied the map with growing frustration. So we're not just facing scattered resistance, we're up against a coordinated network of experienced fighters led by a legendary gunman and a former cavalry commander. Who've had years to prepare, Michael added grimly. While we thought we were implementing our standard acquisition strategy, they were building sophisticated countermeasures. Whitaker moved to his desk, withdrawing a sealed document bearing Burlington Northern's corporate seal, which is why the board authorized this. Protocol Omega, complete operational autonomy. Whatever resources needed, whatever methods required. Territory must be secured before the legislative session. The Mackenzie brothers exchanged significant looks. Protocol Omega meant unrestricted action, corporate backing for extreme measures, but it also meant their opposition had rattled Burlington. Northern's highest levels, bring in the specialists, Whitaker commanded. Not just gunmen, demolition experts, reconnaissance professionals, counterintelligence operatives, full military-style operation. Already started, Michael reported. Called in men from 3 territories, experienced fighters who faced serious opposition. But these aren't common thugs. They're professionals who understand tactical operations. Good, because this isn't just about securing property rights anymore. Whitaker's voice carried a cold purpose. Anderson's network, Hawkins's presence, the sophisticated resistance, it all suggests something bigger. They're not just protecting local interests, they're building a case against our entire territorial expansion strategy. James's expression darkened. The federal investigators Clara Bennett's been coordinating with? They're not just examining local corruption. They're looking at Burlington Northern's whole operation. Exactly. Whitaker moved to another map, this one showing railroad expansion throughout multiple territories. If they can prove corporate connection to local violence, document our systematic pressure tactics. It threatens everything we've built. So we eliminate the threat, James suggested, hand moving to his gun. Decisive action, permanent solutions. But Whitaker's military experience suggested caution. Anderson's too smart for direct confrontation. Man's built defensive networks, established secure supply lines, created documentation systems. Taking him down requires dismantling his entire operation, which means finding their command center, Michael realized. Identifying key personnel, crucial coordination points, systematic elimination of resistance infrastructure. Starting with Willow Creek Ranch, James added with cold anticipation. Hawkins, Anderson, Sarah Mitchell, They've turned that property into resistance headquarters. We take it down hard, make an example that discourages opposition throughout the territory." Whitaker nodded in approval. "Prepare your specialists. I want coordinated attacks on every suspected resistance position. Military precision, overwhelming force. Show them what happens when they challenge corporate authority." Through the window, they watched dust rising as more hired guns arrived. Professional enforcers, tactical specialists, men experienced in crushing opposition to railroad expansion. But something about the resistance network's preparation nagged at Whitaker's tactical instincts. "One more thing," he added, as the Mackenzies prepared to implement his orders. "Anderson's military background suggests he'd anticipate escalation. Watch for traps, prepared responses. Man spent years fighting Apaches. He understands asymmetric warfare." James checked his custom revolvers with cold satisfaction. No matter how prepared they are, Protocol Omega means no limits, no restrictions. By the time we're done, no one in 3 territories will dare resist corporate expansion. But as Whitaker watched his forces gathering strength, professional caution suggested concerns. Throughout his career enforcing railroad interests, he'd never encountered opposition this sophisticated. Anderson's military experience, Hawkins's legendary capabilities, Sarah Mitchell's strategic coordination, they'd created something unprecedented. The sun climbed higher as a new figure entered Whitaker's office. Colonel Marcus Reynolds, recently retired from Army intelligence. At 60, his distinguished appearance masked decades of experience in systematic pacification operations. "Surveillance report," Reynolds announced, producing detailed notes. "Anderson's network is more sophisticated than initially assumed. Not just military-style organization. They've integrated civilian infrastructure into their defensive preparations." Whitaker studied the report with growing concern. "Explain." "Every merchant's delivery route doubles as a supply line. Regular cattle drives mask troop movements. Even church social gatherings serve as coordination meetings. They've built resistance capabilities into normal civilian activities, making it impossible to target their operation without disrupting. Legitimate commerce," Michael realized. "Clever, any action against their network becomes evidence of corporate interference with regular business." Reynolds spread out his own tactical maps. "Found something else. Those Apache trails Anderson's using, they connect to a larger network. Native allies providing traditional navigation knowledge, helping them move supplies through routes that don't appear on any official survey. Which explains why our cargo inspections keep missing their shipments," James added, with frustrated admiration. "They're not just using military tactics. They're combining modern organization with traditional territorial knowledge." Whitaker absorbed these revelations with professional assessment. In every previous territory, Burlington Northern's superior resources and tactical expertise had proved decisive. But here, they faced something unprecedented. Sophisticated resistance, combining multiple forms of territorial expertise. "There's more," Reynolds continued. "Those veterans settled throughout the territory. They're not just maintaining military organization. They've integrated with local communities, established legitimate businesses, and built public trust. Makes it nearly impossible to move against them without creating widespread opposition." "Show me their pattern," Whitaker commanded. As Reynolds indicated positions, a comprehensive strategy emerged. Anderson hadn't just prepared military-style resistance. He'd created a civilian infrastructure designed to expose and counter corporate takeover attempts. "Signal intercepts suggest another problem," Robert reported, joining them with fresh intelligence. "Every time we pressure a business or property owner, detailed documentation reaches federal investigators. They're not just fighting our tactical operations. They're building a legal case against our entire corporate strategy." James cleaned his custom revolvers with cold precision. "So we eliminate their documentation. Burn records, remove witnesses, ensure nothing reaches federal authorities. But Reynolds' expression suggested caution. Not that simple. They've distributed evidence throughout the territory. Every community where we've applied pressure maintains detailed records of corporate interference. Attack one location, others. Release documentation to authorities, like fighting Apaches, Whitaker mused, military experience recognizing the tactical parallel. Hit them one place, they appear somewhere else. Anderson's adapted those strategies to modern resistance. Michael studied property maps with growing frustration. Look at how they've positioned their assets. Every ranch we target has connections to others, financial links, water rights agreements, mutual support arrangements. Can't pressure one without affecting entire networks of legitimate business relationships, which they document meticulously, Reynolds added. Every corporate action becomes evidence of systematic interference with territorial commerce. They're not just resisting our takeover, they're creating a legal framework to challenge railroad authority. A knock heralded the arrival of Burlington Northern's chief legal counsel, Harrison Phillips. The corporate lawyer's usual confidence showed strain. Problem with those emergency injunctions. Every property we target produces documentation showing long-term business relationships, established water rights, legitimate commercial connections. Local courts are hesitating to enforce our claims. Whitaker's expression hardened. Legal pressure had always been crucial to their acquisition strategy. Judge Wilson's absence was supposed to prevent this kind of resistance. Wilson's not the issue, Phillips explained. These property owners have been deliberately creating paper trails, establishing legal precedent through years of documented business operations. Makes it difficult for any judge to simply void their rights. James checked his weapons with cold satisfaction. Legal concerns won't matter once Protocol Omega implements. Corporate authority supersedes local law. That attitude, Reynolds noted, carefully, is exactly what they're counting on. Every extra legal action, every violation of local rights, it all becomes evidence of corporate overreach. They're not just fighting us tactically, they're building a comprehensive case against railroad expansion methods. Through the window, more dust trails marked arriving specialists, professional gunmen, demolition experts, tactical operators, all preparing to implement Protocol Omega's unrestricted mandate. But something about the resistance network's preparation suggested they'd anticipated this escalation. One more thing, Reynolds added, revealing another tactical assessment. Anderson's defensive preparations. They're not just military-style fortifications. He's created interlocking networks of civilian support. Every position we might target is connected to legitimate businesses, community institutions, and established commercial relationships. Meaning what? James demanded, impatient with tactical subtleties. Meaning we can't just eliminate resistance through force, Reynolds explained. Every action against their network impacts legitimate territorial commerce, creates evidence of corporate interference with established business operations. Whitaker moved to the window, watching his forces gather strength. Throughout his career, enforcing railroad interests, he'd never encountered opposition this sophisticated. Anderson's military experience, Hawkins's legendary capabilities, Sarah Mitchell's strategic coordination, they'd created something unprecedented. The morning. Sun cast harsh shadows as more specialists arrived, dust rising from multiple approaches into Silver Springs. Whitaker's operation was escalating to full military-style engagement, but somewhere in the territory, prepared resistance forces waited. The coming conflict wouldn't just determine control of local resources, it would establish precedent for corporate authority throughout the expanding territories. And in his gut, Whitaker's military experience suggested his opponents had anticipated this escalation. They weren't just preparing to resist corporate takeover, they were positioning to expose and challenge the entire system of railroad expansion in the territories. Captain Anderson's hidden command center hummed with focused activity as Rachel translated rapid signals from their observation network. Multiple reports confirmed Whitaker's implementing Protocol Omega, corporate specialists arriving from 3 territories establishing forward positions. Right on schedule, Sarah Mitchell commented, studying their tactical maps. The markers showing corporate agent positions created clear patterns, systematic occupation of key terrain, professional deployment of armed specialists. Thomas Cooper observed their preparations with tactical assessment. His years as Lightning Hawkins had taught him to read opponents' intentions in their movements. Their positioning for coordinated strikes, multiple targets, simultaneous operations, military-style elimination of resistance points. Exactly what we wanted them to think, Anderson replied, revealing new map overlays. Red marks showed confirmed corporate positions, while blue indicated their prepared response points. But now he added green markers, previously concealed defensive positions designed specifically to counter Protocol Omega operations. Signal from Clara's team, Rachel reported. Federal investigators documented Whitaker's specialists arriving. Every professional gunman, every tactical operator, their presence proves corporate authorization of armed enforcement. Eleanor Reed emerged from her communications station, carrying fresh intelligence. Our sources in railroad offices confirmed it. Protocol Omega authorizes unrestricted action, whatever resources needed, whatever methods required. Burlington. Northern's board is desperate to secure the territory before the legislative session. Perfect, Sarah responded, surprising Thomas with her satisfaction. Show him the Omega contingencies, Nathan. Anderson activated hidden panels in the command center's walls, revealing detailed tactical planning boards. Each one showed specific responses to corporate escalation, preparations designed to turn Protocol Omega's aggression into evidence of systematic corruption. Every position they're occupying, Anderson explained, indicating map points, corresponds to defensive preparations we established months ago, not just military countermeasures, legal documentation, witness networks, evidence collection systems. Thomas studied their preparations with growing appreciation. You haven't just prepared to resist their operation, you've positioned yourself to expose it, turn their own aggression into proof of corporate criminality. Signal from Margaret's clinic, Rachel translated rapidly. Whitaker's men pressured medical suppliers, trying to cut off support to resistance-connected communities, but our alternative supply networks are already active. Let them waste time with obvious targets, Eleanor added with professional satisfaction. While they're focused on official suppliers, our distribution system keeps functioning through channels they'll never suspect. Daniel Foster returned from his scouting run, bringing crucial updates. Colonel Reynolds is coordinating their tactical operations. Man's reputation for systematic pacification makes him dangerous, but also predictable. He's implementing standard Army counterinsurgency doctrine. Which is exactly why we prepared these, Anderson replied, revealing another tactical layer. Every counterinsurgency technique they implement creates specific types of evidence. Documentation that proves corporate authorization of military-style operations against civilian targets. Sarah moved to a different planning board, this one showing commercial relationships throughout the territory. They think they're facing military-style resistance. They don't understand that our real strength isn't in tactical positions, it's in legitimate business networks, documented commercial relationships, established legal frameworks. Signal from Benjamin's store, Rachel reported. Corporate agents are implementing systematic cargo inspections, trying to identify our supply lines. But the legitimate business documentation is holding. Every inspection they conduct becomes evidence of interference with normal commerce. Thomas watched their operation with tactical appreciation. During his years as Lightning Hawkins, he'd specialized in direct confrontation, using superior skill to overcome opponents. But Anderson and Sarah had built something far more sophisticated. A network that turned corporate aggression into proof of systematic corruption. "Message from Clara," Eleanor announced. "Federal investigators are particularly interested in Reynolds's involvement. His military background transforms corporate enforcement into evidence of authorized paramilitary operations against civilian targets." A rapid series of signals drew Rachel's attention. Multiple reports, Whitaker's specialists establishing control points around suspected resistance positions, professional deployment, military-style occupation patterns. "Show them." "Phase 2, Sarah instructed. Anderson activated another tactical display, revealing how their prepared responses would systematically document corporate escalation. "Every control point they establish," Anderson explained, "affects legitimate business operations, local commerce, established trade routes, normal civilian activities. Their military-style occupation creates specific types of interference. Interference we've prepared to document and expose." Thomas studied their tactical boards with growing understanding. "You're not just defending against their operation, you're using their own escalation to prove corporate criminality. Every aggressive action they take, thinking they're establishing control, actually strengthens the legal case against them." "Precisely," Sarah confirmed. "Protocol Omega authorizes unrestricted action, whatever methods required. But they don't realize that's exactly what we needed. Proof that Burlington Northern's board explicitly authorized paramilitary operations against civilian targets." New signals arrived through their secure channels. Throughout the territory, resistance cells activated prepared responses to corporate escalation, not through violence or direct confrontation, but through systematic documentation of authorized corporate aggression. "Report from Edwards Financial Network," Rachel translated. "Corporate agents freezing accounts, calling in loans, implementing coordinated financial pressure. But our alternative banking system is already responding. Every pressure attempt creates specific evidence of systematic corporate interference with legitimate commerce." Anderson moved to another tactical display, this one showing regional business relationships. Whitaker thinks controlling key positions will give him power over territorial resistance, but he's overlooking crucial details about commercial networks. "Our legal team's been building cases for months, documenting how corporate military-style enforcement violates territorial statutes." The hidden command center's activity increased as more signals arrived. Throughout the territory, their prepared responses activated in careful coordination. Each corporate escalation under Protocol Omega triggered specific documentation protocols, transforming aggressive enforcement into evidence of systematic corruption. "Signal from Margaret's network," Rachel reported. "Corporate specialists implementing pressure tactics against medical facilities, trying to identify and eliminate resistance support infrastructure." "Let them," Anderson replied, with professional satisfaction. "Every attempt to control civilian medical services becomes documented evidence. Clara's team gets detailed reports of corporate interference with essential community resources." Thomas watched their operation with tactical assessment. Henderson's military experience showed in the precise coordination, the careful preparation, the way they'd anticipated and countered corporate tactics. But this wasn't just a military operation. It was a sophisticated network designed to expose and challenge systematic corporate corruption. Through concealed observation posts, they watched Whitaker's specialists continuing their professional deployment. Corporate agents establishing control points, tactical operators implementing military-style occupation, enforcement specialists preparing coordinated strikes. But in Anderson's hidden command center, a different kind of operation was unfolding. Not just resistance to corporate aggression, but systematic documentation of authorized criminal activity. The morning sun cast harsh shadows as more corporate specialists arrived. A rapid series of signals caught Rachel's attention. Fresh intelligence from their observation network throughout the territory. New development, she translated quickly. Whitaker's brought in specialized demolition teams, military-grade explosives, professional equipment. They're not just planning tactical strikes, they're preparing to reshape the entire landscape. Perfect, Anderson responded, activating another hidden tactical display. Show Thomas why we've been anticipating this specific escalation. The new map overlay revealed carefully documented geological surveys throughout the territory. Every water source they might target, Sarah explained, every key terrain feature they could alter. We've established precise documentation of current conditions. When they implement destructive operations, the changes become proof of deliberate corporate sabotage, Thomas finished, understanding the strategy. Not just property damage, systematic destruction of territorial resources. Signal from Clara's team, Eleanor reported. Federal investigators are particularly interested in these demolition specialists. Their presence transforms corporate enforcement into evidence of authorized environmental warfare. Daniel Foster returned from another scouting run, bringing crucial updates. They're positioning explosives experts here and here, he indicated on the map. Standard military doctrine for denying resource access, planning to destroy water sources, alter drainage patterns, eliminate agricultural viability. Which triggers these, Anderson replied, revealing another set of prepared responses. Every environmental alteration they implement creates specific types of evidence. Our geological documentation proves deliberate corporate destruction of territorial resources. Rachel's hands moved rapidly over the telegraph key as more signals arrived. Multiple reports. Whitaker's demolition teams establishing positions around crucial watershed points. Professional deployment, military-style preparation patterns. Let them, Sarah instructed with quiet confidence. While they're focused on obvious targets, our documentation teams are already recording their preparations. Every explosive they position becomes evidence of authorized corporate sabotage. Thomas studied their operation with growing appreciation. You haven't just prepared to protect resources. You've positioned yourself to prove deliberate corporate destruction of territorial infrastructure. Exactly, Anderson confirmed. Protocol Omega authorizes whatever methods required, including environmental warfare. But they don't realize that's exactly what we needed. Proof that Burlington Northern's board explicitly authorized destruction of civilian resources. Eleanor emerged from her communications station with fresh intelligence. Our sources in railroad offices confirmed additional details. Protocol Omega includes specific authorization for terrain modification operations. Corporate lawyers trying to disguise deliberate destruction as legitimate development activities. Which makes this particularly valuable, Sarah added, revealing carefully preserved documentation. Every water source they target, every geological feature they plan to alter, we've established clear records of current conditions. When they implement destructive operations, the changes become undeniable evidence of corporate sabotage. New signals arrived through their secure channels. Throughout the territory, specialized documentation teams activated in response to corporate escalation. Not just resisting destruction, but systematically recording authorized corporate attacks on civilian resources. Report from Edwards Network, Rachel translated. Corporate demolition teams requisition additional explosives through legitimate suppliers. Every purchase, every equipment transfer. It all creates paper trails connecting Burlington Northern directly to planned destruction. Anderson moved to another tactical display, this one showing regional watershed patterns. Whitaker thinks destroying key water sources will give him control over territorial development. but he's overlooking crucial details about environmental law. Our legal team's been building cases for months, documenting how corporate sabotage violates federal statutes. The Hidden Command Center's activity increased as more signals arrived. Throughout the territory, their prepared responses activated, in careful coordination. Each corporate escalation under Protocol Omega triggered specific documentation protocols, transforming authorized destruction into evidence of systematic corporate criminality. Through concealed observation posts, they watched Whitaker's demolition, specialists continuing their professional deployment. Corporate agents establishing explosive positions, tactical operators implementing military-style preparation, enforcement specialists preparing coordinated strikes. But in Anderson's Hidden Command Center, a different kind of operation was unfolding. Not just resistance to corporate destruction, but systematic documentation of authorized environmental warfare. The morning progressed as more corporate specialists arrived. But somewhere in the territory, prepared response networks were activated. Protocol Omega had authorized unrestricted corporate action, including deliberate destruction of civilian resources. Instead, it was about to provide the final evidence, needed to expose and challenge railroad authority throughout the expanding territories. Storm clouds gathered over Silver Springs as Whitaker's operation reached its crescendo. Corporate agents moved with military precision, implementing Protocol Omega's final phase. James Mackenzie stood at the Lucky Strike Saloon's window, watching specialists deploy for coordinated strikes against suspected resistance positions. Everything in place? Augustus Whitaker inquired, his corporate authority carrying dangerous edges. The railroad enforcer had staked his reputation on crushing territorial resistance. All teams ready, James confirmed, checking his custom revolvers one final time. Simultaneous attacks on 12 targets. Anderson's command center, Willow Creek Ranch, key resistance positions, will eliminate their entire network in one coordinated operation. But even as corporate forces prepared their decisive strike, another kind of operation unfolded throughout the territory. In Eleanor Reed's telegraph office, Clara Bennett transmitted the final pieces of evidence to federal authorities. Every documented corporate action, every authorized violation of territorial law, every piece of proof they'd carefully gathered, all reaching investigators who'd been building a comprehensive case against railroad corruption. Confirmation from Washington, Eleanor reported, translating rapid signals. Federal marshals deploying from 3 directions. Judge Harrison's warrants authorized full intervention. They're moving to intercept corporate forces before the attacks begin. Sarah Mitchell studied their tactical displays, watching prepared. Responses activate throughout the territory. Signal the network. Time to show them what 5 years of preparation really means. In his hidden command center, Captain Anderson coordinated their final countermoves. Not through violence or direct confrontation, but through systematic exposure of corporate criminality. Rachel, transmit the execution codes. Let's show Burlington Northern exactly what Protocol Omega has given us. Throughout the territory, resistance cells implemented precisely planned responses. Every corporate agent deploying for attacks found their movements documented by hidden observers. Every specialist positioning for strikes discovered their operations exposed by prepared evidence networks. Every attempt at coordinated action revealed another layer of proof against railroad authority. Thomas Cooper, who'd hidden his identity as Lightning Hawkins while helping build this resistance, watched corporate forces walking into a trap 5 years in the making. They still think this ends in gunfire, he observed. They haven't realized. We're fighting with different weapons entirely. Signal from Clara's team, Rachel translated rapidly. Federal investigators receiving final documentation. Corporate authorization of armed operations, planned environmental destruction, systematic interference with civilian commerce. Everything needed to prove Burlington Northern's criminal conspiracy. James Mackenzie's voice carried across the saloon as he mustered his strike force. "Remember, no survivors, no witnesses. Protocol Omega means complete elimination of resistance." But even as he spoke, federal marshals moved into position throughout the territory. Judge Harrison's warrants, backed by comprehensive evidence of corporate criminality, authorized immediate intervention against railroad operations. Whitaker received urgent messages from corporate headquarters. Burlington Northern's board, realizing their Protocol Omega authorization provided proof of systematic corruption, attempted to countermand their orders. But it was too late. Their own aggressive escalation had sealed their fate. "Interesting choice," Sarah commented, watching corporate forces deploy. "Every position they take, every order they give, every action they implement, it all becomes evidence. They thought Protocol Omega would give them unrestricted authority. Instead, it proves corporate authorization of criminal operations." Thunder rolled across Silver Springs as federal marshals revealed their presence. Throughout the territory, corporate agents found themselves confronted not by local resistance, but by official law enforcement armed with comprehensive evidence of railroad corruption. James Mackenzie's expression hardened as he realized the trap. They hadn't been fighting simple ranchers or local defenders. They'd faced a sophisticated network designed to expose and challenge systematic corporate criminality. "It's over, James," Thomas called out, finally stepping into view. No longer hiding his identity as Lightning Hawkins, but not needing to rely on his legendary skills either. "Your father died serving men like Whitaker, enforcing corporate corruption. Time to choose a different path." But James's personal vendetta outweighed tactical reality. His hands moved with practiced speed, drawing his custom revolvers. "Going to finish what the Claytons couldn't, Hawkins. No more legends after today." Thomas stood calmly, the familiar stillness settling over him. Not the battle readiness of his gunfighter days, but the quiet confidence of someone who'd found a better way to fight corruption. "Look around, James. Really look. This was never about gunfights or personal vengeance." Through the saloon's windows, they watched federal marshals implementing Judge Harrison's warrants. Corporate agents discovered their own tactical positions. Surrounded, their carefully planned operations exposed by comprehensive documentation. 5 years, Thomas continued. 5 years of building something stronger than any gunfighter's reputation. A network that doesn't fight corruption with violence, but with evidence and justice. Whitaker's professional mask cracked as he realized the full scope of their operation. Every aggressive action authorized under Protocol Omega had actually strengthened the case against Burlington Northern. Their own escalation provided proof of systematic corporate criminality. Throughout the territory, resistance cells revealed their true purpose, not as fighters against corporate forces, but as witnesses documenting authorized corruption. Every position corporate agents had taken, every operation they'd planned, every order they'd followed, all became evidence of railroad criminality. James's hands tightened on his weapons, personal hatred warring with tactical reality. "Father, always said you were the one who really killed him, not the bullets, the betrayal, turning his own men against the Claytons." "No, James. Your father died serving men who saw law as a weapon, who used violence to enforce corruption. Just like Whitaker's using you now, spending lives to protect corporate power." Thunder crashed as James made his choice. His guns cleared leather with professional speed. But he wasn't facing the legendary Lightning Hawkins. He faced someone who'd learned a better way to fight corruption. Thomas's draw was exactly as fast as it needed to be. Not killing shots, precise disabling fire that ended the threat without taking life. James Mackenzie's guns clattered to the floor as federal marshals moved in, adding attempted murder to the charges against corporate agents. Throughout Silver Springs, Judge Harrison's warrants were served on Burlington Northern specialists. Every corporate agent, Every tactical operator, every enforcement specialist discovered their own operations had created proof of systematic criminality. "Interesting strategy," Whitaker commented as marshals took him into custody. "Professional." Appreciation colored his tone. "We thought we were fighting local resistance. Never realized you were building a legal case against railroad expansion methods." 5 years, Sarah replied, watching corporate forces surrender throughout the territory. 5 years of documenting every corporate abuse, every authorized violation, every piece of evidence needed to expose systematic corruption. In Eleanor's telegraph office, Clara received confirmation from Washington. Federal investigators had everything they needed: proof of corporate authorization of criminal operations, documentation of systematic corruption, evidence that would expose railroad expansion methods throughout the territories. The storm broke over Silver Springs as the last corporate agents were taken into custody. Protocol Omega, meant to authorize unrestricted corporate action, had instead provided final proof of railroad criminality. Burlington Northern's board discovered their own aggressive escalation, created evidence that would challenge corporate authority throughout the expanding territories. Thomas Cooper, no longer needing to hide his identity as Lightning Hawkins, stood with Sarah Mitchell and Captain Anderson as federal marshals implemented justice. They'd built something stronger than any gunfighter's legend, a network that fought corruption not through violence, but through evidence and law. Throughout the territory, communities recognized their success meant more than defeating corporate. Our forces, they'd created a precedent that would protect other territories from systematic railroad corruption. Their 5 years of preparation hadn't just saved local ranches, it had established new limits on corporate power in the expanding West. The sun broke through clearing clouds as the last corporate agents were transported to federal custody. James Mackenzie, his wounds treated by Margaret Sullivan, faced justice not just for his own actions, but as evidence of corporate criminality. His personal vendetta against Lightning Hawkins had helped expose Burlington Northern's systematic corruption. Thomas Cooper, who'd once been the most feared gunman in 3 territories, found satisfaction not in legendary skill, but in helping build something more powerful, a community united against corruption, fighting not with violence, but with evidence and justice. The storm passed over Silver Springs as federal marshals completed their operation. Protocol Omega, meant to demonstrate unrestricted corporate authority, had instead proven the power of prepared resistance. Throughout the territories, railroad companies would face new scrutiny, their expansion methods challenged by communities who'd learned to fight corruption through documentation and law. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.